Whatever brought you here tonight, whether the mind is loud or simply restless, or whether you arrived at this hour carrying the particular, unnamed weight that a full day sometimes leaves behind, you are here now, and that is enough. The room is around you. The darkness is already doing its work. There may be the sound of the building settling, or the faint presence of the night outside. Something in the temperature, the particular quality of the air. The weight of whatever covers you is there, if you notice it. A small, steady fact. What you are about to hear is a slow reflection, not a lecture, not a guided exercise, not a set of instructions for how to feel. Simply a quiet companion for the hours when the mind has more to say than the night has room for. Tonight's reflection draws from one of the oldest and most quietly radical philosophical traditions in human history. It draws from the teachings attributed to Laozi, a name that means simply the old master, and from the text he is said to have left behind, the Tao Te Ching. The Tao Te Ching is a small book. In its original form, barely 5,000 characters. It has been translated into more languages than almost any other text ever written. And yet those who have spent lifetimes with it will tell you that it continues to resist full translation. Not because it is obscure or deliberately difficult, but because what it points at exists just beyond the reach of ordinary language. It speaks of the nature of things, of the way the world moves when nothing is forcing it, of the intelligence that lives not in the grasping mind, but in the open, unhurried space beneath it. The breath is moving right now, without any help from you, in and out, slow and steady and entirely on its own. Laozi called this the Tao, the way. Not a way to somewhere, not a method or a map, but the underlying current of existence itself. The quality that water has when it moves without strain. The quality the night has when it simply deepens, without trying to, the way it is doing right now around you. He wrote about stillness not as the opposite of life, but as its source. He wrote about Wu Wei, acting without forcing, the absence of unnecessary effort, the intelligence that moves with the grain of things rather than against it. He wrote about Ziran, naturalness, the quality of what simply is when nothing is overriding it. And about the 10,000 things, which is how Taoist thought names the whole great multiplicity of existence, all the objects and creatures and thoughts and seasons and concerns that arise from the same nameless ground. He wrote about yin and yang, not as opposites at war, but as partners, each containing the seed of the other, each making the other possible. The night that holds the potential of the day, the rest that holds the potential of the action, the quiet that holds the potential of everything that will be said tomorrow. He wrote about the sage, not a dramatic figure, not a hero, but someone whose power comes from the absence of the need to demonstrate power. Someone who has learned to move with the natural current of things, without adding unnecessary weight to every passing moment. Someone who has found, through long attention, that the deepest stillness is not something achieved, but something uncovered, always present beneath the surface of the day, waiting with the patience of stone, the patience of water, the patience of the dark. He wrote about Zhuangzi, or rather, Zhuangzi wrote after him, and extended his ideas with a kind of playful, open-handed wisdom. Zhuangzi, who dreamed he was a butterfly, and upon waking could not be entirely sure which was the dream. Zhuangzi, who described the cook whose knife never dulls because he never forces it, who finds the natural joint, the space that is already there, and moves through it without resistance. Zhuangzi, who wrote about the fasting of the mind, not the absence of thought, but the gradual, voluntary release of the mental habits that consume the most without giving the most back. These ideas are old, 2,500 years old, some of them, and they are also, in some ways, entirely immediate, because everything they point at is here, right here, in this room, at this temperature, in this particular quality of darkness. The body knows how to rest. It has been doing so since long before rest was something to worry about. The breath knows how to deepen. The mind, beneath its surface motion, has a stillness that belongs to it, the way stillness belongs to deep water. Not the stillness of the surface, which can be disturbed by any passing wind, but the stillness of what lies underneath, which the wind never reaches. There may be the soft weight of the night on the room, a coolness or a particular quiet, the sense that the world outside has slowed, that the hours between midnight and morning have their own quality, wider somehow than the hours of the day, less insistent, more willing to simply be what they are. This reflection will not ask anything of you. It will not require effort or concentration or the correct emotional response. You are welcome to follow it closely or to let it wash over you the way sound washes over a room, present, moving through, not asking to be held. You are welcome to drift. You are welcome to sleep before it ends. That is, in many ways, the whole point. There is nowhere you need to be, nothing you need to solve, no version of yourself you need to perform or maintain. The Tao is not somewhere else tonight. It is not something to be achieved by the end of this reflection or by the end of any other effort. It is already present in the breath that is moving without your instruction, in the darkness that is already here without your arrangement, in the quiet that exists just beneath whatever noise the mind is still making, and in the body, warm and still, settling gradually, the way silt settles in undisturbed water, the way everything eventually settles when the stirring stops. Only this, only the soft, unhurried company of some very old ideas about the nature of rest, the intelligence of emptiness, the wisdom of the valley over the summit, the strength of what yields, and the quiet that has been waiting. Patient as water, patient as the Tao itself, beneath the surface of everything you carry. The darkness is around you. The room holds you. The breath continues. Let us begin. There is a particular kind of darkness that arrives not with rest, but with the sudden absence of everything that was keeping you busy. The day ends. The light changes. The body stills. And the mind, as if startled by the silence, begins to speak. You know this moment. You may be inside it right now. It is not a dramatic thing. There is no single thought that arrives like a storm. It is more like water finding the cracks. A small concern about tomorrow. A memory from last week that still carries some unresolved weight. A question about whether something you said was received the way you meant it. And then another thought. And another. Each one reasonable on its own. Together, they become a kind of noise. This is not a flaw in you. It is not a sign that something is wrong. It is the mind doing what minds do when the world steps back and leaves them alone. The mind is, among other things, a problem-solving instrument. It has spent thousands of years evolving toward readiness, toward anticipation, toward scanning the horizon for what might come next. In an earlier time, this capacity meant survival. And so the mind learned to keep working, even when the body needed to stop. It learned to rehearse the conversations that hadn't happened yet, to catalogue the risks that might arrive tomorrow, to hold the unfinished and the unresolved in a kind of suspended attention, just in case resolution was suddenly required. We carry that inheritance with us into this quiet room, into this ordinary night. So we do not judge the restless mind. We do not decide it is the enemy. We simply observe it, the way one might observe a fire still glowing after the wood has burned down. It is not useful now. It is not harmful. It is simply still going. And in the observing, something begins to shift. There is a man who lived roughly 2,500 years ago, somewhere in what is now China, whose name we translate as Laozi, the Old Master. What we know of him is more legend than biography, and that is perhaps fitting, because the ideas attributed to him resist the kind of certainty that biographical facts suggest. One of the stories told about him is this, that he was a keeper of archives in the royal court of the Zhou dynasty, a man surrounded by records, by the accumulated weight of history and governance and human concern. And that late in his life, having watched the slow decline of the kingdom he served, he decided to leave. He rode west on a water buffalo toward the border, toward the edge of the known world, intending to disappear entirely into the wilderness beyond. At the mountain pass, a gatekeeper recognized him. The gatekeeper, whose name is given as Yin Shi, asked the old man to write down his wisdom before he vanished into the unknown. And so Laozi stopped and he wrote 5,000 characters, 81 short chapters. And then, the legend says, he continued through the gate and was never seen again. This story may be entirely invented. Most scholars believe it is. And yet it captures something true about the nature of the Tao Te Ching itself. The sense that what it contains was gathered at the threshold, at the edge between the world of human activity and the vast, nameless quiet beyond it. The sense that it was written not for posterity, not for legacy, but almost reluctantly, as a gift pressed into a stranger's hands before the giver disappeared into the dark. He called it the Tao, the way, not a way to somewhere, not a method, not a path you follow with deliberate steps, but the underlying nature of how things move, how they rest, how they return, the grain of existence itself. The Tao is not a deity. Laozi is careful about this. He does not describe the Tao as a being with intentions or preferences. It does not reward or punish. It does not intervene. It is not watching. The Tao is more like the nature of water than like the mind of a person. It is the way things are when nothing is fighting against them, the path that opens naturally when the forcing stops. And yet, Laozi writes, the Tao is the mother of all things, the source from which the 10,000 things, which is how Chinese philosophy often refers to the whole of existence, the source from which they all arise, and to which, in time, they all return. One of his most repeated observations was this: the Tao acts without forcing. Wu Wei, he called it, often translated as non-action, though that translation misleads. It is not stillness. It is not passivity. It is the absence of unnecessary effort. It is doing what is called for without adding the weight of the self to it, without the grasping, the pushing, the insistence that things be different from what they are. The tree does not decide to grow. The river does not plan its path to the sea. The night does not try to be dark. These things simply are what they are, moving in accordance with their nature. And in that accordance, there is something Laozi called Te, a kind of quiet power, an inner virtue that does not announce itself. It is not something you acquire. It is something that becomes visible when the obscuring layers of effort and performance and self-assertion are allowed to settle. It is what remains when the forcing stops. This is not presented as a lesson for tonight. It is offered simply as a direction to look, because somewhere in the restlessness of the busy mind, there is an assumption that thinking harder will resolve things. That if you go over the problem one more time, if you find the right angle, if you prepare enough, the anxiety will release its grip. But Laozi noticed very quietly that the harder you grip water, the less of it you hold. Let us stay for a while with the ordinary texture of tonight's overthinking. Not to examine it clinically, not to solve it, but to look at it the way you might look at the pattern of light on a ceiling, with a kind of soft, unhurried attention. The thoughts that arrive at night often have a particular quality. They feel urgent. They feel as though they require resolution right now. There is something in the architecture of exhaustion that makes the thoughts more insistent, more circular, more convinced of their own importance. And yet, and this is worth sitting with, almost nothing that arrives in this hour actually requires resolution in this hour. The conversation you replayed 6 times tonight will not be different in the morning for having replayed it a 7th time. The decision that feels impossible at this moment has not become impossible. It has simply become tired. The body holding these thoughts has already done a full day's work. There is a kind of honesty available in recognizing this. Not the honesty that dismisses, not telling yourself it doesn't matter or that you're being foolish, but the honesty that says, this is not the moment for this work. This is the hour for something else. What that something else is, that is what the rest of tonight is for. Before we move deeper into the qualities of the Taoist mind, it is worth resting for a while with the Tao itself, not to define it. Laozi himself insists it cannot be defined, but to circle it slowly, the way you might circle a dark pool at night, feeling its presence more than seeing it clearly. The first words of the Tao Te Ching are among the most translated and discussed in all of world philosophy. In one rendering, they read, "The Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao." In another, "The way that can be spoken of is not the constant way." In another still, "The Tao that can be told is not the everlasting Tao." The translations differ, but they all point at the same paradox, that the Tao Te Ching is a book about something that cannot, by its own first admission, be captured in a book. And yet the book was written anyway, because although the Tao cannot be named, it can be pointed at. Although it cannot be contained in language, language can serve as a gesture toward it. The way a finger pointing at the moon is not the moon, but is still more useful than staring at the ground. Laozi is a master of this pointing. He does not argue. He does not construct elaborate logical frameworks. He makes observations, draws images, and then steps back and lets the silence do the rest of the work. He writes that the Tao is like an empty vessel, and that the emptiness is precisely what makes it useful. He writes that the Tao is like the valley that receives all the streams flowing down from the surrounding mountains. Patient, low, open, and because of that openness, full. He writes that the Tao is the thing that was there before heaven and earth existed, silent and formless, standing alone, changing without cessation, moving through all things without exhausting itself. These are not descriptions. They are orientations. They are ways of tilting the attention slightly away from the usual objects of thought, the problems, the plans, the self, and its concerns, and toward something that is always there, but rarely noticed, something that does not call attention to itself, something that the busy mind continuously overlooks, not because it is hidden, but because it is too quiet to compete with everything louder. There is a concept in Taoism called the 10,000 things, Wan Wu in Chinese. It refers to the entire multiplicity of existence. Every object, every creature, every thought, every sensation, every relationship, every event. The 10,000 things are everything that can be named, categorized, distinguished from everything else. They are the world of difference and distinction that the ordinary mind moves through. The Tao, by contrast, is what the 10,000 things arise from and return to. It is the ground beneath the ground, the silence beneath the sound, the stillness that the movement moves through. Laozi's observation is not that the 10,000 things are unreal, or that the world of difference doesn't matter. He's not offering a philosophy of escape. He's pointing at a relationship, the relationship between the particular and the whole, between the named and the unnameable, between the restless surface of experience and the still depth beneath it. The 10,000 things are what the mind encounters in the day. The busyness, the demands, the relationships, the tasks, the frictions, and the pleasures. All of that is real. All of that matters. But it arises from something. And tonight, in this dark hour, you are in the vicinity of what it arises from. Not because you have gone anywhere, not because you have achieved anything, simply because the 10,000 things have, for the moment, stepped back, and the ground beneath them is perceptible, if you let yourself be quiet enough to notice. Laozi writes about the Tao using a word that resists easy translation, Hesuan, sometimes rendered as mysterious, sometimes as dark, sometimes as deep. It is the quality of something that is real and present, but cannot be grasped directly. The way the night itself is real, you are inside it, surrounded by it, but it offers nothing to hold, no surface to press against, no edges to orient by. This darkness is not frightening in Laozi's use of it. It is not the darkness of danger or of loss. It is the darkness of depth, the darkness of a clear lake in which you cannot see the bottom, not because the water is murky, but because the water is genuinely deep. This is the darkness that surrounds you right now. Not the absence of light in your room, though that too is present, but the deeper darkness that the night brings with it. The sense of the world having grown large and quiet, and somehow less concerned with you than it was during the hours of daylight. In that darkness, the thinking mind often becomes afraid. Not of anything specific, just afraid of the spaciousness itself, afraid of what might be thought, what might be felt, what might rise to the surface when there is nothing left to keep it down. Laozi would recognize this fear, and he would not dismiss it. But he would say, gently, that what the fear is protecting against is not danger. It is simply depth, and depth is not something to be survived. It is something to be entered, slowly, without expectation, without insisting that it reveal itself on your terms. One of the most beautiful passages in the Tao Te Ching is the description of the sage. The person who has lived so long in accordance with the Tao that their nature has become like the Tao itself. The sage, Laozi writes, is like murky water allowed to become still. Over time, not through effort, but through the simple cessation of stirring, the silt settles and the water becomes clear. This is an image worth holding tonight. The mind in its ordinary state is murky water, not because it is contaminated or broken, but because it has been in motion all day, stirred by the 10,000 things, by decision and reaction and engagement and effort. The particles are still suspended. The water is still moving. You do not clarify murky water by working at it. You cannot strain the particles out through willpower. You simply have to stop stirring. You have to put the glass down and wait. The settling happens on its own, according to its own timing, in accordance with the nature of water. The sage, Laozi says, does not rush this process. The sage is patient, not because patience is an achievement, but because the sage has understood that the process will complete itself. It always does. The water always clears when the stirring stops. In the Tao Te Ching, Laozi returns again and again to the image of water. He is drawn to it not as a metaphor for weakness, but as an image of a particular kind of strength that does not look like strength. Water does not assert itself. It does not climb. It does not insist on a particular form. It moves toward the lowest places, the valleys, the basins, the forgotten corners of the landscape. And in doing so, it becomes the source of everything. The highest good is like water, he wrote. Water benefits 10,000 things and does not compete. There is something in that image worth resting with. The mind, in its anxious hours, often moves like fire, upward, outward, consuming, always seeking new fuel. It jumps from thought to thought the way a flame jumps from surface to surface. There is heat and light, but no direction, no destination, no natural resting place. Water moves differently. It finds the path of least resistance, not out of laziness, but out of intelligence. A deep, wordless intelligence that does not need to understand itself in order to function. Consider what happens when you drop a stone into still water. The stone creates ripples. The ripples spread outward. And then, without any effort, without any decision, the water returns to stillness. It does not deliberate about the return. It does not decide. It simply returns. Your mind, by nature, has the same capacity. It is not a capacity that can be forced. You cannot make your mind still by working very hard at being still. You know this already. You have tried. The harder you try to stop thinking, the louder the thoughts become, because the trying is itself a form of thinking. But if you can simply allow the ripples to spread, without following them, without feeding them, without insisting they stop before they are ready to stop, the return happens on its own, as it always does. Water, in Taoism, is not merely a convenient metaphor. It is considered one of the most direct, visible expressions of the Tao itself. Think of what water actually does when left to its own nature. It does not choose a direction. It responds to the shape of the ground. It does not maintain a form. It becomes the shape of whatever holds it. It does not resist obstacles. It finds the way around, or it waits, accumulating patiently behind the obstruction, until there is enough of it to move forward or to find another path. Water carves canyons not through force, but through persistence. It is not hard, it is not aggressive, and yet over time, given enough of itself and enough patience, it reshapes stone. The stone, which appears so much stronger, which endures each individual contact without apparent change, is nonetheless slowly yielded by the water's unconcerned, unhurried, effortless returning. This is what Laozi means when he speaks of the strength of softness. This is what he means when he writes that the gentle overcomes the hard, that the yielding overcomes the rigid. He is not making a naive argument. He is not saying that softness always wins in the short term, in the way that a rigid wall wins against a soft body in the immediate moment of collision. He is talking about something longer, something more patient. He is talking about the nature of things over time and about the exhaustion that eventually comes to everything that insists on its own hardness. There is a quality of water that Laozi particularly values, which is its willingness to occupy the lowest place. He writes, "The highest good is like water, which benefits the 10,000 things and does not contend. It stays in lowly places that others disdain. The lowly places, the overlooked corners, the spaces beneath things. This is not a romantic image of humility. It is an observation about where power actually accumulates. The valley, which receives all the streams from the surrounding mountains, is lower than all of them, and yet it becomes the source of the river. The root, which is buried in darkness beneath the tree, is more essential than the branches that reach upward into the light. And the mind that is willing to rest, that is willing to sink down into the quiet, to occupy the low place that the ambitious and the anxious mind disdains, that mind is not weakening itself. It is restoring something. It is filling back up, the way the valley fills from below, from what flows in when the rushing and the climbing pauses. This is what this hour is. Not a defeat, not a concession to weakness. The lowest place, the receiving place, the place where the water comes to rest before it has enough to move again. Laozi wrote about something he called the uncarved block, pu in his language, the raw material before the craftsman touches it, the original nature before the world begins shaping it according to its own preferences and demands. He was not being sentimental about childhood or naive about the complexity of adult life. He was pointing at something more subtle, the sense that beneath the accumulated layers of habit, strategy, worry, performance, and self-construction, there is something that was already sufficient, something that does not need to earn its right to rest. In its original form, the block of wood contains every possible shape. It has not yet been narrowed by carving into one particular thing. The craftsman's act of shaping is both a revelation and a reduction. Something is given form, and in being given one form, all other forms are lost. Laozi's affection for the uncarved block is an affection for that original openness, the state before the narrowing, before the world assigned you a role and you learned to inhabit it. Before the 1,000 small negotiations between what you actually are and what the situation requires produced the person who arrived in this room tonight, carrying the day's accumulated weight. That earlier, wider, uncarved thing is not gone. It has simply been waiting, with the patience of wood, with the patience of the Tao itself, the philosopher and psychologist, who came thousands of years after Laozi, would use different language. They would speak of the observing self, the part of consciousness that watches the thoughts without being the thoughts. They would speak of the difference between having a feeling and being that feeling, between the mind in motion and the awareness that holds the mind in motion without being disturbed by it. Different language, a very similar pointing, because what both traditions noticed, the ancient Chinese sage and the modern inquiry into the mind, is that behind the noise of thinking, there is something that is simply present, something that is not threatened by the thoughts, not troubled by them, not needing them to stop in order to be at peace. It is not a place you arrive at by doing something. It is more like a recognition, a turning of attention that reveals what was already there. You have touched this in your life, even if you did not name it, in the moment after a long laugh, before the next thought arrives, in the stillness at the end of a piece of music that moved you, in the second between waking and remembering who you are and what you owe the day. There is a quality to those moments, a kind of open, undemanding awareness that is not produced by any effort. It is simply what the mind is when nothing is required of it. There is a chapter in the Tao Te Ching that speaks of the 30 spokes of a wheel meeting at the hub. It is the emptiness at the hub, Laozi observes, that makes the wheel useful. A bowl is useful not because of the clay, but because of the empty space the clay surrounds. A room is useful not because of the walls, but because of the space contained within. He was pointing at something that the busyness of the thinking mind often forgets, that the space between thoughts is not a failure of thinking. It is not dead time. It is not the absence of something valuable. It is the condition that makes everything else possible. The silence between notes is what makes music. The pause between words is what makes meaning. The rest between efforts is what makes the effort possible at all. And so, the silence of this hour, the silence that the overthinking mind is trying so hard to fill, is not an empty thing waiting to be occupied. It is already something. It already has value. You do not need to fill it. Wu Wei is perhaps the most misunderstood concept in Taoism, and also the one most immediately relevant to the mind that cannot sleep. Let us spend some time with it. In Chinese, the two characters of Wu Wei mean simply without action, or without forcing, or not acting against the nature of things. It is a negative formulation. It describes something by its absence. And this is already instructive, because it tells us that Wu Wei is not a technique. It is not a practice you add to your life. It is more like the gradual removal of something that was already there in excess. The excessive effort, the unnecessary insistence, the constant overriding of what would naturally occur if you were simply to step back and let it. Laozi notices that much of what human beings suffer is the result not of what is happening to them, but of what they are doing in response to what is happening to them. The resistance, the insistence, the grasping and the pushing, the refusal to allow the moment to be what it is. He does not say this to blame. He says it as an observation. He's pointing at the curious fact that the very efforts we make to secure our well-being often work against it. The more tightly you grip what you love, the more anxiously you monitor the things you fear losing. The more exhaustively you try to think your way to certainty, the further you tend to find yourself from the ease and clarity you are trying to reach. This is not a unique insight to Laozi. The paradox of effort shows up in traditions around the world, but Laozi has a particular way of framing it, through the concept of naturalness, the way things move when nothing is fighting against them, the shape life takes when the self is not constantly interfering with its own unfolding. Wu Wei, as it applies to tonight, is this: the attempt to sleep is one of the most reliable ways to prevent sleep. The mind that is working very hard at being calm is not calm. The mind that is monitoring its own stillness for signs of progress is not still. The mind that is reviewing the day in order to process it is, in that reviewing, living the day again. This is not a reason for frustration. It is simply a recognition. The sleep that is pursued is elusive. The sleep that is allowed tends to arrive. Laozi writes that the sage does not compete, and therefore no one can compete with him. Applied to the present moment, this might sound like: the mind that does not try to resolve the night finds that the night resolves itself. Not through any action on your part, not through doing anything right, but through the gradual, patient withdrawal of the doing itself. There is a related concept in Taoism called ziran, often translated as naturalness or spontaneity, or simply as things as they are. It is sometimes described as the way the Tao expresses itself, naturally, without deliberation, without the insertion of a self that wants outcomes. Laozi writes, "Humanity follows the earth follows heaven follows the Tao follows what is natural. What is natural, ziran, is the final term in this series. Not a god, not a divine will, not a principle invented by human thought, simply what is natural, what things do when nothing is overriding them. The body knows how to sleep. This is something worth stating plainly. The body has been sleeping since before you had any idea that sleep was something you could be anxious about. It knows the rhythm. It knows the direction. It does not need instruction. What it needs, the only thing it needs from you tonight, is for the insistence to stop, for the monitoring to ease, for the part of the mind that is trying to make sleep happen to recognize quietly that it has been doing a job that was never its job to do, and to step back. Let us follow this a little further into the Taoist understanding of the self. One of the more quietly radical things about Laozi's philosophy is his treatment of the self, the ego, the part of a person that identifies with its own thoughts, plans, desires, and history. He does not say the self is unreal. He does not say it should be extinguished. He treats it more like any other phenomenon of the 10,000 things, real within its domain, but not the whole of what you are, and not the most reliable guide to what the moment requires. In Taoist thought, the self that asserts itself, that insists on its own preferences, that pushes back against the natural movement of things, is sometimes called the small self, not in a diminishing way, but in the sense of small in scale. It is the self of personality, habit, and preference. The the self that wants to be comfortable, to be seen clearly, to have its decisions validated, to know what tomorrow will bring. This is a genuine self. Its concerns are genuine. Tonight's thoughts are real thoughts, not illusions. But behind this small self, not above it, not in opposition to it, but behind it in the way that the sky is behind the clouds, is something that does not fluctuate with the news of the day, something that is not threatened by the unresolved conversation or the uncertain decision, something that has been present through every previous restless night and every long and difficult day, and that has not, despite everything, been diminished. Laozi calls this the deeper self, the original nature, the uncarved block before the world got to work on it. Tonight is not a performance for this deeper self. Tonight is simply what it is: a dark hour, a tired body, a mind slowly releasing its grip on the day. And the deeper self requires nothing from any of it. It is already present. It has already arrived. It does not need to be found. Wu Wei also implies something about the nature of time. Specifically, the Taoist understanding that the present moment is complete in itself, that it does not need to be hurried through on the way to something more important. Much of the anxiety that fills the night is anxiety about time. There is not enough of it. Tomorrow will arrive before the things that need to be ready are ready. The night itself is slipping away, and sleep is not coming, and there will not be enough hours, and the tiredness will compound itself into tomorrow. And this is the mind in its most characteristic error. Not stupidity, not weakness. Simply the error of treating this moment as a problem to be solved rather than a situation to be inhabited. Laozi writes repeatedly about the value of slowness. Not slowness as inefficiency, but slowness as a relationship with time that allows each moment to be what it actually is. He writes about the sage who does not rush, and who therefore accomplishes everything. Not because speed is bad, but because the rushing is itself a form of violence, against the moment, against the body, against the natural pace of things. The night is at its own pace. The body is at its own pace. Even the thoughts, if you watch them without following them, are moving at their own pace toward their own natural resting point. The only thing that is rushing is the part of the mind that thinks it should all be happening faster. There is also, within the concept of Wu Wei, an understanding about the nature of problems themselves that is worth sitting with here in the dark. Laozi observes that many of what we call problems are not problems in the sense of puzzles that require solutions. They are more like weather, conditions that arise, develop, and eventually pass of their own accord. The trying to solve them is often what gives them their staying power. The wrestling with them is often what keeps them present. He writes, "Act without acting, work without working, taste without tasting. This is not a call to indifference. It is a call to a different quality of engagement, one that is present without grasping, that responds without insisting, that participates in the world without the constant violence of demanding that it be otherwise. Much of the night's overthinking is the mind attempting to solve things by visiting them repeatedly, as though the problem, if examined often enough, will yield to the sheer persistence of the attention. But Laozi's tradition, and the cook who cuts the ox with a knife that has never been dulled, points at something different. When the blade meets resistance, you do not press harder. You stop, you move, you find the joint. You follow the nature of what is actually there, rather than imposing the force of what you wish were there. The problems of tomorrow are not accessible tonight. The joints are not visible in this light. The nature of things at this hour is rest. And the most intelligent response to that nature is to align with it, not as a concession, but as a sophisticated recognition of what the moment actually calls for. This is Wu Wei applied to the night. Not giving up, not withdrawing, simply recognizing that the knife belongs in its sheath until morning. There is one more dimension of Wu Wei that deserves attention before we move on. Laozi writes, "In doing nothing, nothing is left undone." This is one of the most paradoxical statements in the Tao Te Ching, and one of the most misunderstood. It sounds like a justification for passivity. It sounds like the kind of thing someone might say to avoid responsibility. But Laozi is pointing at something more precise. He is pointing at the extraordinary productivity of aligned action, action that works with the grain of things rather than against it. The farmer who understands the land, the weather, the season, and the nature of the seeds does not produce a harvest through force of will alone. The harvest comes from working with what is actually there, from the patient, attentive, non-forcing engagement with conditions as they are. In doing nothing means enforcing nothing, in imposing nothing, in adding no unnecessary weight of ego or agenda to what the situation naturally calls for. Nothing is left undone means that when action is perfectly aligned with the nature of the moment, it is complete. It does not leave the residue of effort and struggle. It does not deplete in the way that forcing depletes. It moves through what is present and leaves it better, the way water moves through a landscape and leaves it nourished. Tonight, the doing nothing is the most complete thing available. Nothing is left undone by the rest that is taking place right now. The body is being restored. The mind is being given the emptiness it needs. The Tao is doing what the Tao always does: sustaining, receiving, returning, and nothing, in the deepest sense, is left undone. Taoism contains within it one of the most quietly beautiful and useful frameworks in all of human thought, the understanding of yin and yang. These two words have been reduced in the modern world to a simple binary: dark and light, feminine and masculine, passive and active. And while these associations are present in the original, they barely scratch the surface of what the concept actually contains. Yin and yang are not opposites in the Western sense of opposition. Two things that exclude each other, that are at war, that define themselves by negating the other. In Taoist thought, yin and yang are complementary aspects of a single reality. They contain each other. They generate each other. They cannot exist independently. Each is defined only in relation to the other, and each contains, at its fullest expression, the seed of its opposite. This is what the familiar symbol shows, if you look closely. The dark half contains a small circle of light. The light half contains a small circle of dark. At the moment of maximum yin, something of yang is already present, already beginning. At the moment of maximum yang, the turn toward yin has already started. This is not a visual decoration. It is a precise philosophical statement about the nature of change. In the yin-yang understanding, night is quintessentially yin. Dark, cool, receptive, inward, quiet, still. The qualities that the body moves toward naturally after the yang energy of the day, the brightness, the outward movement, the heat of activity and engagement. But here is what is important. Yin is not lesser than yang. It is not the inferior half of the pairing. It is not the period you endure in order to return to the vitality of the yang day. Yin is the ground. It is the receptive field from which the active emerges. Yang energy without the restoration of yin becomes brittle, exhausted, burned out. The day without the night becomes unsustainable. The action without the rest becomes destructive. The speaking without the listening becomes noise. Laozi is, in many ways, a philosopher of yin. He writes about the valley rather than the mountain, the yielding rather than the resistant, the low rather than the high, the quiet rather than the loud, not because these are the only qualities worth valuing, but because they are the ones that get overlooked, that get dismissed as passive or weak or inefficient by a world oriented almost entirely toward yang expression. Tonight is a yin moment, a moment that does not need to produce anything, a moment that is not less than the day, that is, in fact, the dark necessary ground from which tomorrow's day will emerge. The Taoists who came after Laozi, among them the philosopher Zhuangzi, and the long tradition of practitioners who developed what would become philosophical and religious Taoism, paid close attention to the way nature moves between yin and yang. They noticed that this movement is not a mechanical alternation, like a light switch flipping between on and off. It is more like the movement of tides, or of seasons, or of breath. There is a flowing between the two poles, and the transition itself, the in-between time, the threshold, has its own quality, neither fully one nor fully the other. A liminal space, neither day nor night, neither waking nor sleep. You may be in that liminal space right now, not quite awake, not in the sharpness of full waking attention, not yet asleep, not yet released into the dreaming body, somewhere in between. This is not a failure. This is not a problem to be solved. This is the threshold, the turning place, the moment in which the tide is neither coming in nor going out, but suspended between the two, perfectly still for one long breath before the direction changes. In Taoist thought, the threshold has a particular kind of power. Not the power of action or achievement, but the power of openness, the field of maximum possibility, before the direction is fixed again, before the next thing becomes the thing. Zhuangzi, who lived perhaps a century after Laozi, and whose writings form the second great pillar of Taoist philosophy, was deeply interested in the relationship between waking and dreaming. He had a famous story, or rather a famous observation, about dreaming that he was a butterfly. He wrote, "Once upon a time, Zhuangzi dreamt he was a butterfly, fluttering freely, quite happy, unaware of being Zhuangzi. Then he awoke and found himself unmistakably a man. And then he asked, 'Am I a man who has just been dreaming he is a butterfly? Or am I a butterfly now dreaming I am a man?' This is not a riddle. It is not meant to be unsettling. It is meant to loosen something, to allow the question of what is real and what is constructed to breathe for a moment without demanding an immediate answer. What Zhuangzi is pointing at is the permeability of the boundaries we assume to be fixed, the boundary between the dreaming self and the waking self, between the self we perform in the world and the self that exists when the performance pauses, between the solid, identified person with a name and a history and a set of concerns, and the open, unidentified awareness in which all of that arises and subsides. At this hour, you are already moving toward the butterfly. The identified self, the one with the concerns and the unresolved conversations and the plans for tomorrow, is already loosening its grip on the night, already becoming less certain of its edges, already beginning the slow dissolve into the wider, quieter, less self-conscious state that the body is moving toward. This is not a loss. This is a return. The yin quality of darkness has another dimension in Taoist thought that is worth dwelling in for a moment. The dark, in Taoism, is not the absence of the light. It is its own presence, its own richness, its own kind of knowing. There is a kind of perception that only becomes available in reduced light, not the sharp, clear, object-by-object perception of full daylight, but a wider, softer, peripheral awareness that does not focus on any single thing, but receives everything at once. Night animals have this. The eye in darkness uses different cells, the rods rather than the cones. And what it loses in sharpness, it gains in sensitivity, a different kind of seeing. And there is a corresponding quality of the mind at night. The sharp, analytic, problem-solving awareness that serves you in the daytime becomes less dominant. And in its place, something softer and wider begins to be available. Not the absence of intelligence, but a different kind, more associative, more receptive, more attuned to connections and qualities, rather than categories and solutions. Laozi values this night mind. He writes about the sage who does not rely on brightness alone, who is willing to know without knowing how they know, to understand without grasping, to be intelligent in the manner of the valley rather than the manner of the summit. If the daytime mind is the knowing of the mountaintop, clear, sharp, commanding, seeing everything from above, the night mind is the knowing of the valley, receiving, patient, held by the darkness, nourished by what flows down from everywhere. Both are real. Both are necessary. Tonight belongs to the valley. In the Tao Te Ching, Laozi returns repeatedly to a figure he calls the sage, the wise person, the one who has, through long attention to the nature of things, learned to move in alignment with the Tao rather than against it. The sage, in Laozi's rendering, is not a dramatic figure, not a hero, not a conqueror, not a visionary who bends the world to their will. The sage is, in many ways, unremarkable from the outside. Laozi describes the sage as someone who acts without leaving traces, who leads without making people feel led, who accomplishes without the appearance of effort. The sage does not compete, Laozi writes. And because the sage does not compete, the world cannot compete with the sage. This is a kind of paradox, but it is a lived paradox rather than a logical one. The person who has stopped needing to win has, in a certain sense, already won, not in the sense of defeating anyone, but in the sense of no longer being subject to the losses that inevitably come to those who measure their life in victories. The sage has found, through some combination of experience and attention, and what Laozi might call the natural ripening of a life lived close to the Tao, a relationship with the present moment that does not require the present moment to be different from what it is. This is not indifference. The sage responds to things. The sage acts, moves, engages with the world. The absence of competition is not the absence of participation. It is the absence of the grasping quality, the desperate edge that comes from believing that what you are and what you have is not by itself enough. We encounter here a quality that Laozi returns to often, the quality of Ching, clarity, purity, the undisturbed surface of a still mind, sometimes translated as serenity, though that word carries associations of comfort and ease that Ching doesn't necessarily imply. Ching is more like clearness, the kind of clearness that comes not from the absence of depth, but from the settling of what was disturbed. A bell that has been struck has Ching in the long, clear tone that follows the initial strike, not in the strike itself, which is yang, sudden, loud, forceful, but in the dying of the sound into silence, the gradual clarification as the vibration settles back toward stillness. This is what the mind does when it is allowed to. The initial strikes of the day, the stresses, the encounters, the decisions, the small and large frictions, these produce vibration. They ring the bell, and the natural movement after that ringing is toward Ching, toward the long, clear, settling tone, toward the stillness that is not emptiness, but resolution. You don't have to do anything to help with this. You just have to stop striking the bell again. In the Tao Te Ching, Laozi returns repeatedly to a figure he calls the sage, the wise person, the one who has, through long attention to the nature of things, learned to move in alignment with the Tao rather than against it. The sage, in Laozi's rendering, is not a dramatic figure, not a hero, not a conqueror, not a visionary who bends the world to their will. The sage is, in many ways, unremarkable from the outside. Laozi describes the sage as someone who acts without leaving traces, who leads without making people feel led, who accomplishes without the appearance of effort. The sage does not compete, Laozi writes. And because the sage does not compete, the world cannot compete with the sage. This is a kind of paradox, but it is a lived paradox rather than a logical one. The person who has stopped needing to win has, in a certain sense, already won, not in the sense of defeating anyone, but in the sense of no longer being subject to the losses that inevitably come to those who measure their life in victories. The sage has found, through some combination of experience and attention, and what Laozi might call the natural ripening of a life lived close to the Tao, a relationship with the present moment that does not require the present moment to be different from what it is. This is not indifference. The sage responds to things. The sage acts, moves, engages with the world. The absence of competition is not the absence of participation. It is the absence of the grasping quality, the desperate edge that comes from believing that what you are and what you have is not by itself enough. We encounter here a quality that Laozi returns to often, the quality of Ching, clarity, purity, the undisturbed surface of a still mind, sometimes translated as serenity, though that word carries associations of comfort and ease that Ching doesn't necessarily imply. Ching is more like clearness, the kind of clearness that comes not from the absence of depth, but from the settling of what was disturbed. A bell that has been struck has Ching in the long, clear tone that follows the initial strike, not in the strike itself, which is yang, sudden, loud, forceful, but in the dying of the sound into silence are the gradual clarification as the vibration settles back toward stillness. This is what the mind does when it is allowed to. The initial strikes of the day, the stresses, the encounters, the decisions, the small and large frictions, these produce vibration. They ring the bell. And the natural movement after that ringing is toward Qing, toward the long, clear, settling tone, toward the stillness that is not emptiness, but resolution. You don't have to do anything to help with this. You just have to stop striking the bell again. Alongside Wu Wei, alongside Ziren and Qing, there is another quality that Taoist thought associates with the sage and with alignment with the Tao. It is called Pu, the uncarved block, and it is worth returning to it now, more slowly. Pu is sometimes described as the Taoist virtue of simplicity. Not the simplicity of the simple-minded, but the simplicity of what is original. What has not been overcomplicated by self-consciousness, by self-promotion, by the exhausting performance of being more than one actually is. Children, Laozi suggests, have pu. Not because children are wiser than adults. They lack knowledge, experience, judgment. But because children have not yet fully learned to monitor themselves. They have not yet fully learned to be their own critics, their own audience, their own performance assessors. They are closer to what they actually are, and less concerned with what they are supposed to be. The sage recovers something of this quality, not through becoming childlike, but through a long and honest process of gradually setting down the unnecessary, the pretenses, the anxious self-improvement projects, the careful management of how one appears. Not because these things are bad, but because they are heavy, and the person who has been carrying them long enough begins to notice the weight. Pu is the lightness that remains when the unnecessary weight has been set down. Tonight is not a good night for self-improvement projects. Tonight is not a good night for performance or for management of appearances, or for a careful assessment of the kind of person you are becoming. Tonight is a good night for PU, for simplicity, for the recognition that beneath all the layers of what you are doing and trying and worrying about, there is something that simply is, requiring nothing, performing nothing, already complete. The Taoist philosopher Zhuangzi had a way of describing this original nature that is worth lingering over. He wrote about the cook who cuts the ox. The story is this. A cook is preparing an ox for the table. A prince watches and is amazed at the skill. The knife moves without apparent effort, gliding through the joints and spaces in the animal, as though it knows exactly where to go. The sound is like music. Nothing is forced. Nothing resists. The cook explains. In the beginning, he saw only the whole ox. Now, after years of practice, he sees it as it actually is. The spaces between, the natural joints, the places where the blade can pass without meeting resistance. He no longer cuts against anything. He follows the natural structure of what is there. His knife has not been blunted in 19 years because he never forces it against bone. This is one of the most precise images in all of Taoist literature for what Wu Wei looks like in practice. Not the absence of action, but action that is so perfectly aligned with the nature of the situation that it encounters no unnecessary resistance. Zhuangzi's cook is not passive. He is not doing nothing. He is doing something very demanding, in fact. But the demand is on attention, on sensitivity, on the willingness to follow rather than to force. The knife finds the joint. The action follows the nature of the thing. There is something in this for the mind at rest. The mind that cannot sleep is often using the knife against bone. It is forcing itself against the natural structure of the night, against the body's downward pull, against the breath's slow deepening, against the natural dissolution of the waking state into something quieter. What would it mean tonight to find the joint, to let the attention go where it naturally goes, rather than pulling it back to the problems and the unresolved? To follow the natural structure of this hour rather than working against it? The knife does not have to cut hard. It only has to find the space that is already there. We have spoken of the uncarved block and of emptiness at the hub of the wheel. Let us now stay for a while with the Taoist understanding of emptiness itself. Xu in Chinese, because it is one of the most counterintuitive and, once understood, most restful ideas in the whole of Taoist philosophy. The Western tradition, broadly speaking, tends to treat emptiness as absence, as a lack, as the state in which something is missing that should be present. An empty room is a room waiting to be furnished. An empty mind is a mind waiting to be filled. An empty moment is a moment not yet occupied by something meaningful. Laozi disagrees. Not violently. He never disagrees violently, but thoroughly. He writes about the door and window openings in a room, the walls, the roof, the floor. These are solid, and it is tempting to say that these are what the room is made of. But Laozi points out that you cannot actually live in the walls. You live in the space between them. The emptiness is not the absence of the room. The emptiness is the room. The wheel returns to mind. 30 spokes meet at the hub. Without the hollow of the hub, without the empty space at the center, there is no wheel. There is just 30 spokes and a circle of wood. The emptiness is not the flaw in the design. The emptiness is what makes the design work. This is a difficult thing to hold for a mind trained in Western habits of thought. We tend to value the solid, the full, the productive, the occupied. Empty time is wasted time. An empty mind is an unproductive mind. Silence is the absence of communication. But Laozi is pointing at something that direct experience consistently confirms, if you sit still long enough to notice it. The empty spaces are where things happen. The silence in a conversation is where understanding deepens. The pause between the teacher's words and the student's response is where learning actually occurs. The moment of stillness between an action and its consequence is where genuine choice becomes possible. The night between the days is where the integration happens, where the mind and body process what the daylight hours produced. The emptiness is not waiting to be filled. The emptiness is already doing its work. There is a quality of silence that Taoism values in a way that is difficult to communicate without experiencing it. The Chinese tradition of ink painting, which was deeply influenced by Taoist philosophy, understood this well. In Chinese ink painting, the empty space on the paper is not background. It is not the absence of painting. It is the breathing room of the image, the mist that surrounds the mountain, the sky that the bird moves through, the water that the boat sits on without the water being explicitly painted. A master of ink painting knows that too much painting ruins the painting. The empty space has to be preserved, protected, allowed to remain. The painter who fills every inch of the paper has not made the painting fuller. They have made it suffocating. There is a saying among practitioners of this tradition that the most important brushstroke is the one you do not make. The restraint. The choosing to leave a space empty that the hand might have been tempted to fill. The recognition that the white of the paper is not absence, but presence. The presence of breath, of air, of the suggestion that the world extends beyond the edges of what is depicted. The mountain only exists as a mountain because of the mist that surrounds it, the emptiness that defines its edges, the white space that allows it to be seen as distinct, as whole, as present. And the thought only exists as a thought because of the silence around it. The awareness only has a recognizable quality because of the open space in which it moves. Tonight, the silence is the white of the paper. The thoughts that remain are the occasional brushstroke. And the painting, if you will allow the metaphor, is more complete, not less, for the space that surrounds them. The same applies to the mind that fills every moment with thinking, that refuses the empty spaces, that populates every silence with narration and analysis and planning, has not made itself fuller or more productive. It has, over time, made itself suffocating, crowded, unable to breathe. Tonight is a moment to put the brush down, not to achieve something with the empty space, not to make anything of the silence, simply to allow the white space to be what it is, the breathing room of the mind, the condition that makes everything else possible. Laozi writes, "Those who know do not speak. Those who speak do not know." This is, again, easy to misread. He is not making an argument against communication. He is pointing at the relationship between what can be said and what is most essentially true. The deepest things resist articulation. They can be pointed at, as this entire reflection has been attempting to do, but they cannot be captured. The pointing is useful. The pointing is worthwhile. But the point itself is not the pointing. The silence on the other side of all the words is not empty. It is the thing the words were trying to describe all along. And right now, as the words grow fewer, and the pauses grow longer, and the quiet deepens in this room, that silence is becoming more audible, more present, more recognizable as the thing it is. Not nothing, not the absence of meaning, but the fullest presence of the ground that was here before the day began and will be here after tomorrow ends. Zhuangzi writes about something he calls the fasting of the mind. It is, again, not a technique or a practice in the conventional sense. It is the gradual, voluntary relinquishment of the mental habits that consume the most energy without producing the most clarity, the constant judging, the anxious comparing, the relentless narration of events, the commentary the mind provides on everything it encounters, including itself. The way one thought generates another thought, which generates another, not through logic or necessity, but simply through the mind's habit of motion. The fasting of the mind is not the elimination of thought. It is the gradual recognition that not every thought needs to be followed. Not every association needs to be pursued. Not every inner commentary requires a response. Some thoughts can simply be allowed to arise and subside without generating a sequel, like clouds crossing a sky that remains unchanged by their passing. This is a Taoist image that has been adopted and adapted by many traditions. the mind as sky, the thoughts as clouds. It sounds simple, and as a concept, it is simple. As an actual experience, it requires a quality of patience and non-interference that is genuinely difficult to sustain when the thoughts are insistent. But the image is useful because it points at something true, that the clouds are not the sky, that however many clouds pass, however dense and grey and pressing they become, they have never once, in the history of weather, actually changed the sky. The sky is not affected by the clouds. The sky is not improved by their clearing. The sky simply is what it is. Open, vast, ungraspable, the condition within which all the weather happens. Your awareness is the sky. The thoughts are the weather. There is also, in Taoist thought, a concept of Jing, often translated as stillness or quiescence. Not the stillness of dead things, but the stillness of a pine tree in still air. Present, alive, rooted but unmoving. The kind of stillness that is not the absence of life, but its most concentrated expression. Jing is one of the three treasures that Taoist cultivation often seeks to preserve and restore. The other two are qi, the vital energy that moves through the body, and shen, the spirit or awareness. Together, these three constitute what a person actually is at their most essential. The insight from this triad that is most relevant tonight is the relationship between Jing and qi. When the body is still and the mind is quiet, qi is preserved and restored rather than spent. The Taoist understanding of health is, among other things, an understanding of what depletes the vital energy and what restores it. Activity, effort, anxiety, and the constant expenditure of mental and emotional energy all consume qi. Rest, stillness, sleep, the quiet receptivity of the yin state. These restore it. The body knows this. It is what the heaviness behind the eyes is pointing at. It is what the slowing of the breath knows. The body is restoring itself right now if you give it the conditions it needs. You do not have to do anything for this process. You only have to stop doing things against it. We have been moving for a while now, slowly but moving, and the mind that began this hour in one place is perhaps already in a slightly different place. Not because anything has been resolved, not because the concerns of the day have disappeared, but because the attention has been gently, persistently redirected toward something larger, something slower, something that does not require resolution tonight. This is enough. This is, in fact, quite a lot. Laozi wrote, "To the mind that is still, the whole universe surrenders." This is easy to misread as a kind of grand promise. A transaction, be still, and receive the universe in return. But that is not quite what he meant. He meant something quieter, something less dramatic. He meant that when the grasping stops, when the constant self-assertion of the busy mind relaxes even a little, what was always present becomes visible. The ordinary reveals itself as extraordinary. The familiar reveals itself as strange and vast. The silence reveals itself as full. Not because anything has changed in the world, but because the filter of urgent wanting has softened enough to let more of the world through. This happens in small ways. The sound of the room, which was always there, the weight of the body, which has been carrying you all day without being noticed, the rhythm of the breath, which has been moving without permission or direction since the beginning. The breath does not overthink. Notice, if you are willing, the breath right now, not as an instruction, not as an exercise, simply as a noticing. The inhale arrives. It fills what is available to be filled. It does not try to be longer than it is. And then it releases. Not because it decided to, because releasing is the natural continuation of filling. The exhale does not cling to the air. It does not try to hold on to what was. It simply lets go completely into the space that receives it. And then the inhale arrives again, without effort, without planning, because this is what breath does. This is, in its own wordless way, what Laozi was pointing at. The natural movement of things, the returning, the release, the endless, effortless cycle that requires nothing from the thinking mind except to step aside and let it happen. In Taoism, the breath is not merely a physiological function. It is understood as the most immediate and continuous expression of qi, the vital energy that moves through everything. Every inhale is an act of receiving. Every exhale is an act of releasing. In this way, the breath is a continuous, wordless practice of the central Taoist movement, the movement between fullness and emptiness, between holding and letting go, between the yang of the inhale and the yin of the exhale. You have been doing this your entire life without knowing it. Every breath, a small teaching in Wu Wei. Every exhale, a brief, complete act of letting go. And the body, when it is allowed to breathe without interference, without the anxious monitoring of the thinking mind, deepens naturally towards sleep. The breath slows. The exhales lengthen. The pauses at the end of the exhale. The brief, open emptiness before the next inhale begins. These grow longer and quieter and more spacious. The body is already moving. It has been moving toward this since the last light of the day. You do not need to hurry it along. You only need to stop pulling it back. The thoughts may still be there. That is fine. Thoughts are not the problem. The relationship to the thoughts is the only thing that ever needed softening. A thought that is observed, noticed with a kind of mild, unhurried attention, is very different from a thought that is engaged, followed, answered, built upon, worried over. The first kind moves through. The second kind grows. You do not have to make the thoughts stop. You only have to stop going with them. Let them arrive as they will. Let them exist for a moment in the field of your awareness. And let them move on, as all things, in their own time, move on. There is a line from the Tao Te Ching that, in one translation, reads, "Return is the movement of the Tao." Return, not arrival, not achievement, not the reaching of a destination after a long journey, but return, the movement back towards something that was never entirely lost. This is what sleep is, what rest is, what the quiet hour, when it is allowed to be what it is, actually contains. Not an absence, not a stopping, a return. The self that has spent the day being purposeful and responsible and responsive to the world's demands. That self is allowed, in this hour, to set its tools down and simply be what it was before all of that began. Something that breathes, something that is warm, something that does not require a reason to exist. The day has asked a great deal of you, not as an accusation, simply as a recognition. The day asked, and you answered, many times, in many ways, with more competence and care than you tend to credit yourself for in these quiet hours when the mind turns critical. And now the day has ended. Its asking is finished. Its accounting is done. Whatever remains unresolved will wait. not because you have chosen to abandon it, but because it has no other option tonight. The tomorrow in which those things might be addressed has not arrived yet, and no amount of visiting it in thought will bring it closer. What exists right now is only this moment, the weight of the body, the sound of the room, the soft, continuous movement of the breath. Laozi's text ends with a chapter that many find strange, a description of a small village where the people have all that they need and do not feel compelled to go anywhere else. They hear the dogs barking in the neighboring village, but have no desire to go and see what is there. It sounds, to the modern ear, like a fantasy of retreat, like giving up. But the point is not about literal villages or literal borders. The point is about sufficiency, about the radical possibility that this, what is already here, is enough. Not forever, not as a philosophy of permanent contentment, but right now, in this moment, the breath that is moving, the darkness that is soft, the mind that is, perhaps, just the smallest degree less insistent than it was an hour ago. This is enough. Right now, this is enough. The concerns of tomorrow are real. They are not being dismissed, but they belong to tomorrow, and tomorrow belongs to itself. You have done what could be done today. You will do what can be done tomorrow. In between is this space, this dark, this quiet, this returning, and the only thing required of you in it is nothing at all. The Tao does not announce itself. This is one of the things that makes it difficult to speak of and easy to overlook. If the Tao announced itself, if it arrived with the force of revelation or the clarity of a precisely stated truth, the mind would have somewhere to grip, something to hold and examine and evaluate, a fact to be assessed against other facts. But the Tao is not like that. It is more like the quality of the air on a particular morning, the one you notice only by the way it makes you feel as you step outside, before you have formed any thoughts about the day. Something in the temperature, the light, the particular texture of the silence, something that you receive rather than reason your way to. Laozi writes that the Tao is like the Great Mother, not a human mother, but the mother quality of existence itself, the receiving, the nourishing, the containing without confining, the sustaining that asks nothing back. He writes, "The Tao is the refuge of the good person, and the protector even of the person who is not good." This is a radical statement. Not that the Tao rewards virtue and punishes its absence, but that the Tao does not discriminate, that the ground of being, the sustaining depth beneath the 10,000 things, is available to everything that exists without condition. The good person and the person who has lost their way, the calm mind and the restless one, the successful day and the failed one. The Tao does not withhold itself from the difficult night. It is not elsewhere when the thoughts are loud. It is precisely here, as it always is, the ground beneath the ground, the quiet beneath the noise, the stillness that the movement moves through. In the tradition of Taoist practice, not the philosophy, but the lived practice that developed in China over centuries, there is a concept of Hun Yuan, which means original chaos or undifferentiated wholeness. It refers to the state before the 10,000 things separated out into their distinct forms, the primordial, undivided condition from which all distinction arises. Some traditions of Taoist meditation work with this concept as an orientation for practice. The attempt not to achieve anything, not to become anything, not to get anywhere. but simply to allow the awareness to return, however briefly, to something of the quality it had before it learned to be so thoroughly divided against itself. The divided mind, the mind that is commenting on its own experience, criticizing its own performance, rehearsing its own future, reviewing its own past, is one of the peculiar achievements of human consciousness. Animals, as far as we can observe, do not have this quality. They are not divided between their experience and their commentary on their experience. They are simply in the experience. The Taoist traditions understood this as a kind of fall, not a moral fall, not a punishment, but a structural consequence of the development of consciousness. The very capacity that makes human beings extraordinary, the self-reflective awareness, the ability to think about thinking, to plan ahead, to learn from the past. This capacity also introduced a divide within experience that did not exist before. Hun Yuan is, in part, a pointing back toward the state before that divide was fully established. Not a regression, not a return to unconsciousness, but a temporary resting in the less divided state. The state in which the commentary softens, in which the self is less thoroughly an observer of itself, and more simply what it is, without the constant accompaniment of its own narration. This happens in sleep. This happens at the edges of sleep. This is what is available right now. There is a particular concept in Taoist thought about time and the present moment that I want to offer here, slowly, because it tends to land quietly if received without hurry. In ordinary experience, time feels like a river we are moving through, or perhaps moving along with. The past is behind us, the future ahead, and we are somewhere in between, moving steadily from one toward the other. This is the linear time of clocks and calendars and deadlines and schedules. But Taoist thought points at a different quality of the present, one that is not in between past and future, but that contains something of a different order entirely. Not a moment on the line, but the ground on which the line rests. Not a thin slice of now between the vast weight of then and the pressing urgency of what is coming, but something spacious, something that has been here for longer than the problems of today, something that will be here after they are resolved. The Tao Te Ching speaks often of the ancient and the enduring, of what was here before heaven and earth, of what does not change as the 10,000 things arise and subside. This is not an abstraction. It is pointing at something accessible in direct experience, the quality of the present moment, when it is not being hurried through on the way to something else, when the urgency drops even slightly, even for a breath. The present moment opens. It becomes less like a thin slice and more like a space to inhabit, not a crossing point, but a place of rest. The night, at its deepest, has this quality. The hour between midnight and dawn, the hour when the day has fully released its hold, and the morning has not yet begun its insistence. This hour has a spaciousness that is unlike any other. You may be approaching it. You may already be inside it. Laozi is also deeply interested in the nature of change, and in a specific quality of change that he thinks is universally overlooked. He writes, "Returning to the root is called stillness. Stillness is called returning to one's destiny. Returning to one's destiny is called the eternal." This is a passage that rewards slow attention. Returning to the root. he means not the root of a plant, but the originating ground, the source from which a thing came, and the nature in which it is most truly itself. The root of a tree is not visible. It is underground, in the dark, unseen by anyone who looks only at what is above the surface. But without the root, nothing above the surface is possible. Stillness. Not the stillness of death or of stoppage, but the stillness of deep-rootedness, the stillness of the thing that does not need to move, because it is already exactly where it needs to be. The tree in still air, the mountain that does not announce itself, the lake at 4 in the morning when the wind has not yet risen, returning to one's destiny. In this context, destiny does not mean the dramatic unfolding of a fated life. It means the nature of what a thing is, what it is most deeply and originally inclined to be. The destiny of water is to flow downward. The destiny of the root is to grow deeper. The destiny of the tired body in the dark, in this room, on this night, is to rest. The eternal, the unchanging quality that underlies all the changing forms. Not heaven, not a theological absolute, just the quality of what endures, what persists, what is still recognizably itself after all the surfaces have changed. And all of this, Laozi says, is what stillness is, not the absence of things, but the return to the deepest root of what things are. The Taoists who came after Laozi also paid close attention to impermanence, the way all things pass, all states dissolve, all forms return eventually to the formlessness from which they emerged. This is a teaching that, received in a certain mood, can feel melancholy, the impermanence of all good things. The way what is held is always in the process of being released. But received in the Taoist spirit, impermanence is not a tragedy. It is the very mechanism by which renewal is possible. The leaf that falls allows the light to reach the ground. The wave that breaks allows the shoreline to be refreshed. The day that ends allows the night to restore what the day consumed. And the thought that dissolves, the concern that loses its edge as the night deepens, the worry that grows thin and distant as the body grows heavier and the breath grows slower. This is not a defeat of the thought. It is the thought completing its natural arc, arising, existing briefly, and returning to the quiet from which it came. All thoughts are impermanent. All feelings are impermanent. Even the feeling of urgency, of pressing concern, of the night's particular quality of sleepless wait, this too is impermanent. Not because you are making it so, because impermanence is the nature of all things. The Tao does not end, but everything that arises within the Tao is subject to return, to the cycle of arising and subsiding, to the rhythm of the full and the empty, the high and the low, the day and the night. And tonight, like every night that has ever been, the movement is toward quiet, toward the low place, toward the dark receiving ground. Laozi writes, near the end of the Tao Te Ching, that the person who knows is not argumentative, and the person who is argumentative does not know. The word he is reaching for with knowing is not the knowing of facts and information. It is closer to the Chinese concept of zhi, understanding that arises from deep alignment with the nature of things. Not the knowing that can be stated in propositions, but the knowing that is lived. The knowing that shows up not in speech, but in how a person moves through the world. Lightly, unhurriedly, without resistance to what is. The mind at rest is not an ignorant mind. It is a mind that has, for this hour at least, stopped arguing with the nature of things, stopped insisting that the night be different, stopped demanding resolution from the unresolved, stopped pressing the knife against the bone. And in that stopping, a different kind of knowing becomes available. Not the sharp knowing of analysis and problem solving, but the soft knowing of the body at rest, the knowing of the breath, the knowing of the dark, the knowing that is older than language and quieter than thought and more reliable in the long run than anything the busy mind produces in the small hours before dawn. Laozi writes about the sage again and again as someone whose power comes precisely from the absence of the need to demonstrate power. The sage does not compete, does not assert, does not announce. And yet, and this is the paradox at the heart of Taoist thought, the sage endures. The sage influences without forcing. The sage shapes without commanding. Because the sage is aligned with the Tao, and the Tao, which does nothing, accomplishes everything. This sage is not a remote historical ideal. This sage is a description of a quality that is available in any life, in any hour. The quality of what remains when the unnecessary is stripped away, when the performance ends, when the working and the trying and the monitoring and the insisting have exhausted themselves, and there is simply nothing left to do. What remains in that moment is not nothing. What remains is considerable. It is the breath still moving, the body still warm, the awareness still present, the darkness still receiving. These are not small things. These are, in the Taoist understanding, exactly what is most essential. The root, the ground, the deep and silent water that the river was always, at its most fundamental, made of. Laozi writes about the sage, again, as someone who holds the ancient Tao and manages the present affairs. Not someone who escapes the present. Not someone who retreats entirely from the concerns of daily life into some permanent state of spiritual abstraction, but someone who moves through the present, through the 10,000 things with all their demands and frictions and urgencies, while remaining connected to the ancient ground beneath them, the stillness that underlies the movement, the silence that underlies the noise. You have been managing present affairs all day, and there will be more present affairs to manage tomorrow. But right now, in this window between the affairs, there is an opportunity to touch the ancient ground, to remember briefly that the urgent is not the important, and the important is not always the visible, and the deepest sources of what sustains you are not the ones that announce themselves most loudly. The ancient Tao is not far away. It is not behind the next thought or beneath the next resolved concern. It is here. It is the here-ness of here, the presence of the present, the ground on which the night is resting, and you, resting on the night, are resting on the same ground, without knowing it, perhaps, without needing to know it, simply by being still long enough for the knowing to arrive, quietly, in its own time, without announcement. Laozi writes about the sage, at last, as someone whose footprints are not seen. A beautiful image. The sage passes through the world but does not leave unnecessary marks. Not because the sage is inconsequential. The sage nourishes like water, like the valley. But because the sage does not add the weight of the self to every passing, does not insist on being remembered by each encounter, does not require the world to reshape itself around the fact of the sage's presence. This is the quality of the night itself. The night passes. It leaves no footprints. It does not insist on being recognized or acknowledged for the work it does. And yet without the night, without this unremarkable, unannounced, uncelebrated passage of dark hours, nothing would be restored, nothing would be renewed. The world that emerges into the morning has been quietly, invisibly prepared by what happened in the night. You are part of that preparation. This rest is part of that preparation. The quiet, footprint-free passage through these dark hours is part of what allows tomorrow to be a day, rather than simply the continuation of today's exhaustion. Laozi writes about the sage, a final time, as someone who does not contend, and therefore no one contends with them. Let the night not be contended with. Let the thoughts not be contended with. Let the tiredness not be contended with. Let the slowness of the mind not be contended with. Let the darkness be the darkness, uncontended. Let the silence be the silence, uncontended. Let the body be the body, heavy, warm, sinking, deserving, uncontended. There is nothing here to fight. There never was. The Tao does not contend, and, Laozi observes, nothing in the world is able to contend with the Tao. Laozi writes about a quality he calls de, or sometimes te, which is usually rendered as virtue, or power, or inner strength. But ti is not virtue in the moral sense, not a quality you develop by working hard at being good. It is more like the natural expression of alignment with the Tao. The way the water's power comes not from its hardness, but from its perfect faithfulness to its own nature. The way the tree's strength comes not from its defiance of the wind, but from its deep-rootedness, the rootedness that allows it to bend without breaking. Ti is what becomes available when the forcing stops and the natural quality of a thing is allowed to express itself. The quality of your own nature, the specific texture of your awareness, the particular way you perceive and feel and respond, this is not something that needs to be earned or improved before it is allowed to rest. Tonight, the IT required is simply the TD of the tired body, the TE of the mind that has worked enough, the TE of the night itself, dark, receiving, quiet, asking nothing. These are already present, already sufficient, already aligned. There is a final image that Laozi offers near the end of the Tao Te Ching that is worth bringing into this hour. He describes the sage as one who, at the end of a life lived close to the Tao, has become indistinguishable from the world around them, not in the sense of having lost their individual nature, but in the sense of having ceased to be in friction with the nature of things. The sage has become, in a sense, like the valley, like the water, like the dark sky that holds the stars without grasping them, that watches the clouds pass without following them, that simply remains itself, open, vast, unhurried, as everything else moves through. You are not required to become a sage tonight. You are not required to achieve anything, but you are invited to rest for a while in the direction the sage is pointing, in the quality of the sky rather than the cloud, in the quality of the water rather than the wave, in the quality of the ground rather than what moves across it. The water does not struggle toward the sea. It moves through the landscape in the direction it is drawn, taking the shape of whatever it passes through, nourishing whatever it touches, without urgency, without plan, without the belief that it needs to be somewhere other than where it already is. And eventually, not because it tried, but because this is the nature of water, it arrives. You are already moving in the direction you need to move. You do not need to force it. You do not need to monitor it. You do not need to solve it tonight. The breath moves. The room holds you. The night continues its ancient, unhurried work. And somewhere beneath the last remaining thoughts, which are growing quieter now, not because you made them quiet, but because quietness is simply what comes when the forcing stops. Somewhere beneath all of that, there is something that has been resting all along, waiting without impatience for you to find your way back to it, as you will, as you always do. Let the weight of the body settle into what holds it. Let the eyes be still behind their closing. Let the breath do what the breath has always done, without help, without instruction, without anything from you at all. Let the thoughts that remain grow thin and distant, like voices from another room, present but not requiring anything. Let the darkness be what it is, not empty, not threatening, but full of a kind of rich, unhurried nothing that the exhausted mind and the tired body have been moving toward all day. Let the Tao do what the Tao does, the sustaining, the receiving, the holding, the returning, without any assistance from the thinking mind, which has already given enough today. Let the yin deepen. Let the 10,000 things grow quiet. Let the uncarved block remember what it was before the carving. You have arrived. Not somewhere remarkable, not somewhere you needed to earn. Just here, just this, returning as things do, as water returns, as the breath returns, as the night returns, and the dark returns, and the stillness returns, not because anyone summoned it, but because returning is the nature of all things, and because you, like everything else, are subject to that nature, and because tonight you are allowing yourself to be.